Well, hello there. Glad to have you back. Don't mind me, just taking care of my lovely plant here. But since we're on the topic, why don't you stick around for tonight's story? What happens when a strange green liquid leaks into a town's local water supply? Well, that's exactly what our main character will soon find out. So please, grab yourself a chair, sit back, relax, and as always, let's get spooky. No one knows exactly what caused all of this to happen. Not that anyone is left alive except for me. At least, I think I'm the only one left. I remember it all clearly. It was a Tuesday morning and I had almost finished doing some chores that I had let pile up during the previous week. I live alone and rent out a small 2-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood. I had swept throughout my place and cleaned the bathroom. All that was left now were my dishes. I removed the dirty plates and bowls from the sink and poured the soap. But when I turned on the water, that's when I noticed something incredibly bizarre. Instead of the usual clear water, what poured out of my faucet was a sickly green sludge. I quickly turned it off and was hit with an intense smell. The stench was like a mixture of freshly cut grass and expired milk. I gagged as I turned away. What the hell? I thought to myself. Something must have gotten into the pipes, but I didn't know what could possibly cause this. I ran into the bathroom and turned the water on both the sink and the bathtub. I had hoped that the issue was exclusive to the kitchen sink, but both released that same green sludge. I began to panic a little, but kept my composure as I called my landlord. It rang for a few seconds before I got an answer. I began to speak up immediately. Hey Richard, it's Austin. I'm not sure how to explain this, but my water is... Yeah, I'm fully aware. Apparently the whole damn town is affected. I called the water company and they were no help. I'm going to do my best to figure out when we can get this fixed. In the meantime, people are flocking to the stores to stock up on cases of water. I suggest you do the same. With that, I thanked him and hung up. As I got ready to head to the local grocery store, I turned the TV on to see if anyone was reporting on this. And sure enough, I saw a broadcast of our local news station. The reporter was talking about the whole situation while standing in front of a park entrance. The park housed a river that flowed throughout the whole town, and just like what my faucets poured out, the entire river was made up of the same green sludge. The reporter left what caused this pretty vague, and I got the impression that they also had no clue what was going on. I began to speculate that some chemical must have accidentally spilled, and now the town has to pay the price. The news gave no estimate of when this issue would be resolved and strongly suggested that people be patient. I was frustrated, but I turned off the TV and grabbed my keys. As I got into my car, I noticed that everyone on my street had the same idea as me, all loading up into their vehicles to head to the local grocery store. I saw Kenneth, my neighbor across the street, and waved him down. Hey Kenneth, did you catch the broadcast? Yeah, good thing I did too. I was planning on sleeping in today. You going out to get water as well? I'm gonna try. Seeing as how the whole town has a head start on us, I can only hope that there's at least something left. We both let out a slight chuckle. Well, hey, best of luck. Stay out of trouble, okay? I nodded in return and began to drive. The roads were crowded with people panicking and rushing around to stock up on supplies. I couldn't blame them, though. This was a very abnormal situation. It became clear that I wasn't going anywhere fast on the main road, so I took some side streets to get around the backed-up traffic. I began to see the large store sign and quickly drove back onto the main road that led to the parking lot. I had to cut someone off abruptly, which caused them to honk and scream at me, but I ignored them. I pulled into the parking lot, and I saw Kenneth heading up to the entrance. When he turned around, he saw me and waved me over. I followed him inside, and we began to grab what little cases of water that were left. Got enough to last you, bud? Kenneth asked. Yeah, this'll be good, I hope. Some of these people have multiple carts full. I'm surprised there was anything left. We got in a long line at the checkout area. I don't recall how long we stood there, but Kenneth and I began to hear shouting near the exit. We couldn't quite make out what had caused this fight, but it had something to do with there being no water left to buy. Things escalated when one of the men pulled out a knife and attacked the other. People began to scream and rush for the door, some leaving their purchases behind while others simply took the opportunity to steal. All hell broke loose and I froze while Kenneth wasted no time taking his water and getting in his truck. He yelled back, which snapped me out of my paralyzing shock. Kenneth was already out the door, along with many others. I needed to get out as well. I wasn't exactly keen on just stealing all this water, but I needed it, and I wasn't about to risk my life over trying to pay for it. The police began to show up to try to break up the violence, but that just added to all the chaos. I didn't even make it to the sidewalk, and the store was already a war zone. Just as I got to my car, I heard a loud rattling noise coming from behind me. A man was running toward me with a cart filled with water and food. At first, it looked like he was coming after me, but he stopped just as he reached his vehicle, which was parked next to mine. Suddenly, we both heard a loud shout. "You don't need that much, you son of a bitch!" Another man tackled the one that was next to me. They fought for a moment before the man with the cart was stabbed several times. The attacker looked up at me, rage filling his eyes. "Put your hands up right now before I shoot," yelled a young police officer. The man spun around and lunged at the cop. Several shots were fired and I quickly ran to get inside my car. I took advantage of the situation and grabbed a couple extra bottles of water before speeding out of there. I pulled into my driveway and looked around. I had managed to make it back before anybody else did. The last thing I needed was for someone to see I had normal water and try to attack me for it. Shortly after, Kenneth pulled into his home as well. I got everything inside and, after a few minutes, let out a sigh of relief. I turned on the TV again to find the broadcast was still live. This time, they were covering all the riots and looting. I made sure to really ration the clean water, deciding when to use it and when not to. A few hours had passed, and by this time, most of my neighbors had returned, but some didn't. I thought that maybe they were able to leave town, but when I checked in on the broadcast, I stood there in shock as they made it known that the town was cut off from the rest of the world. Large gates and barricades were posted at every possible exit. I watched in horror as several armed guards fired into a crowd of people who were trying to leave. Any attempt to leave led to death. I couldn't watch anymore. I turned off the TV and tried to call someone. I didn't care who. I just wanted someone to talk to. No service. Great, I thought to myself. I considered just going over to Kenneth's house, but decided against it. Everyone is probably so on edge that any visitor would surely be treated with extreme caution. I walked over to my sink and turned it on. I desperately hoped that somehow this was over. I was met with the familiar sight of green sludge and that horrid stench. I began to lose my cool and started throwing things around in frustration. How much longer will we have to deal with this? I began to cry and fell to the floor, hugging my legs in. How much longer? A few days passed and I was a shell of my former self. I was drained and tired. My water was still lasting me, but if things weren't resolved soon, I'd run out. I looked toward the faucets and began to entertain the idea of drinking the sludge. Would I die of dehydration? Or would I die by drinking the green water? My food was running a little low too, but still had enough to last me maybe 4 or 5 more days. I stared out my window for several minutes, beginning to fall asleep. Suddenly, a loud scream jolted me awake. "Someone help me!" It was muffled and gargled, but I could still make out what was being said. I looked down the street to see a shambling figure making its way toward our houses. As he got closer, I got a better look at him. It was an old man, but not entirely. I could make out that he had various twigs and vegetation sticking out from his skin. I thought maybe he fell down a hill in the woods or something. He continued to scream for help, and it was beginning to get to me. I got up, grabbed a first aid kit, and ran out the front door. My neighbor next to me, Tom, had the same idea, as he got to the old man as quickly as I did. I saw Kenneth across the street also coming out to help, with the other neighbors looking out their window or from their porch. It was a ghastly sight. The vegetation that I had thought was simply jabbed into him was actually growing out of him. Every few seconds, the leaves and moss on his face would begin to spread a little, and the branches grew from his arms slightly. "My God, what happened to you?" Tom had asked, beginning to open up the kit that I had brought. I was too frozen by the sight to do anything but to stand there. I drank it. I drank the water," he sputtered out. Kenneth ran toward us to help Tom find something to use. "I drank it. I'm sorry. I drank it," he repeated over and over again. Tears began to form in my eyes as the growth got larger. "Don't drink. I... Sorry. Sorry," he shouted as his chest burst open and several thorny vines flew out and wrapped around Tom. "What the hell?" Kenneth yelled, signaling for me to help. I snapped out of it and tried to get the vines off of Tom. The old man kept apologizing and screaming as he pulled Tom closer. Kenneth grabbed a pair of surgical scissors and tried to cut through the vines. He managed to slice through one of them, but as he did, a dark green liquid shot out onto Kenneth's arm, burning him. He screamed and fell backwards as I ran to help him up. With no one holding Tom, he was quickly pulled into the old man's chest. Tom's scream echoed in the empty street, and I watched what was happening. Tom was being fused with the old man, with the vegetation rapidly growing around him, until finally, Tom was engulfed. It only took a few seconds, as Tom was being drenched in the green liquid, and he began to change rapidly before our very eyes into a similar monstrosity. Tom screamed in pain as whole branches, leaves, and mossy growths began to sprout all over his body. Tom and the old man turned to me and Kenneth and reached out for us, all the while screaming for someone to help them. "Come on, we have to get inside," I yelled as I grabbed Kenneth and my kit. We both turned back to get inside to safety, but not before a vine from the old man flung out at us. It barely missed me, as Kenneth had shoved me to the side as the vine whipped past us before retracting. I scrambled to my feet and we both got inside before the plant creatures could get to us. I slammed the door behind me as Kenneth ran to get some furniture to block the entrance. The old man was still in the street, but Tom was faster, already throwing his vegetated body against the door. "Move!" Kenneth yelled as he slammed the sofa against the door. Tom continued to bang on the door for several minutes before stopping. We peeked out the window and I could see him go back out to the street with the other plant monster. They both began to go around to each of the houses, desperately trying to get inside. While we had just enough time to barricade our front door, it was clear that the other neighbors did not. We watched in horror as Tom forced himself inside one of the houses. Kenneth and I tried our best to block out the screams and the occasional gunshot as we fortified the apartment. I peeked outside one last time before closing off the window for good. I was devastated by what I saw. The street was littered with these plant abominations that were once people that I knew and spoke to on a regular basis just a week ago. "My God," I whispered. Kenneth pulled me back and closed off the view. I glanced at his arm where the green liquid made contact. It was looking significantly worse than before, almost looking like tiny leaves were beginning to grow. "Kenneth, your arm," I said, pointing at the wound. "Shit, it looks like it's starting to spread. Do you have any medical supplies?" We grabbed my first aid kit and we began to try to treat it. No matter what we did, though, it didn't stop the spreading. Every attempt seemed to cause Kenneth immense pain and made the wound spread faster. "All right, stop. It's not working," he said, gasping for breath. The reality of the situation began to sink in. Before long, Kenneth would turn into one of these things outside. Neither one of us said it out loud, but our silence confirmed the dreadful truth. We got our mind off of it by going back to work. We began to fortify different rooms, the bathroom being our safe room, should the creatures get inside somehow. I also collected all of our resources, as well as any potential weapon that we could use. Since these things were plants, they would be extremely vulnerable to fire. Anything that could be used to produce a flame, we grabbed. During our raid of anything useful, I found something. It was a fresh can of weed killer. I had bought it a few weeks ago, but never got around to using it. Hey Kenneth, what if we tried to use this stuff on your wound? I said, showing him the can. He stared at it for a bit before responding. Ugh. I get the feeling this will be the most painful attempt to treat this, but what other choice do we have? He held out his arm, preparing for the inevitable torment he was about to endure. I sprayed the plant wound, and a hideous sizzle let out, as well as a loud scream from Kenneth. It began to bubble and writhe around, as I could see the little growths begin to dissolve. Kenneth, it's working! You just gotta make it through while I spray on more, I said, both excited and worried. I'll try. It'll beat the alternative for sure, he said with a slight smirk, trying to mask his pain. I readied the can once more when we both heard commotion coming from around the apartment. The plant creatures were trying to get inside. I have no idea how many of my neighbors got infected, but it sounded like all of them. The sheer amount of banging we heard, along with the haunting screams, confirmed that we may be the only ones left alive. Forgive us. Please run. Escape. Help me. Don't drink it, was all we could hear amongst the banging. Another sound was heard that made my heart sink. The barricade was beginning to crumble. Listen, go to the bathroom. I'll use the rest of this can to cure my wound and hopefully spray any of those bastards that get inside. With any luck, they'll think we got tons of this stuff and leave us be for now. What if it doesn't? I'm not just going to leave you out here, I shouted back. We don't even know if this will get rid of my wound for good. If it does end up working, I'll come knocking, okay? Reluctantly, I agreed. I rushed to the bathroom as he ran towards the front. Locking the door behind me, I heard his screams, as well as the screams of the plant creatures. The sound of that hideous sizzling echoed throughout the apartment, and then silence. No sound could be heard. That was a few hours ago. I now feel compelled to write down what happened in this town. I only hope that someone finds this and reveals it to the public. If you're reading this, and you are or work for the ones responsible for the events that occurred here, I pray that you suffer the same horrific fate that we did. I also feel obligated to share Kenneth's fate. Shortly after his scuffle, it was silent for a little while. Suddenly, I heard a knock on the bathroom door. I stood up quickly and reached for the handle, but froze when I heard his voice. Don't open the door. Oh, poor guy. Well, that'll do it for tonight's story. Anyway, thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you again soon. I do have a few projects that I'm working on behind the scenes, so I look forward to sharing that with you all. Good night, and stay spooky.